Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth semi-annual Catalyst Day. Thank you for joining us today. So we now have for our next presentation, group number 16, and they will be presenting their work on Revitalized Nation, Uranium Decontamination of the Navajo Nation.
So, hi, my name is Olivia.
My name is Dylan.
My name is Matt.
I'm Lydia.
I'm Lauren.
Okay, so due to the COVID-19 pandemic, some of the Navajo members have created a group known as the Water Warriors. This group started to deliver water to the sick and elderly since they cannot safely leave their homes to get clean water. One of the Navajo residents said that they got a PayPal and purchased their own water tank, put it in the back of their truck, and hit the road to deliver water to people who couldn't do it themselves safely. This is just one example of how the Navajo Nation is suffering due to the lack of access of clean water. We are focusing on the Navajo Nation reservation that is located across the states of New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. This can be seen on this map. In total, this reservation is approximately 17,035,000 acres, or about half of the size of the state of New York. This reservation is also home to 110 chapters of Navajo people for a total of 177,637. And across the entire United States, the population of Navajo is 331,813. During World War II, the Navajo were a major part of US history. Men from the Navajo tribe were selected to serve on the front lines to help the United States Marines. During the first 2 days of battle, there were 6 Navajo men who worked 24/7 to send and receive over 800 coded messages so that the Japanese could not break these codes. One of the majors that are in the Marines said that if it were not for the Navajo people, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima, and while the war was going on, the US was negotiating with the Navajo people for the mining rights on their land. So on the Navajo land, the water contaminant problem began about a year before the end of World War II. During this time, the United States government agreed on a plan with the Navajo Nation to mine uranium. And from 1944 to 1986, the United States government extracted over 30 million tons of uranium. This uranium was then used as ballast for ships, counterweights for aircrafts, and also used in ammunition and armor. After 1986, the US government abandoned these mines, and currently on the Navajo Nation, there are over 100 abandoned uranium mines and over 1,200 mine features. This map is showing the mines and the mine features that are currently abandoned on Navajo Nation. And since these mines were they were abandoned and not just shut down properly, they are still emitting radiation from uranium and other contaminants. This radiation is now affecting the water supply, which is now directly impacting the Navajo people who live by these mines and use it on a regular basis. Since there are a few areas where you can find regulated water sources on the Navajo Nation, people have been subject to use unregulated water sources. These unregulated wells are not controlled by the government, so there isn't a known amount of contaminants that are in this type of water, which means that they are most likely exceeding the legal limits. And due to the higher levels of contaminants, this is leading to more health concerns like uranium poisoning, cancer, effects in babies, kidney failure, and more. Water is a vital resource. Without it, everyone would suffer. Humans use water on a daily basis for necessary bodily functions like protecting your spinal cord. Most plants rely on water to stay alive, and aquatic animals rely on clean water to keep them alive. Clean water isn't just something that people want, it's something that is needed for survival. This picture is just an example of one of the abandoned uranium mines that is located in Cameron, Arizona. It looks just like an abandoned city. You can't see the radiation effects. Most of the abandoned mines have fencing and signs telling people that it has contamination, but this is not, so people aren't really sure what's going on the Navajo Nation. And this is just one example of the hundreds of abandoned mines that are located across this nation. Abandoned uranium mines are not just the Navajo land. Across the western part of the United States, there are over 100,000 abandoned hard rock mines in which thousands are continuing to pollute, just like the uranium mines that are on the Navajo land. On the Navajo land, about the Navajo households have to travel to get clean water due to the regulated water sources being farther away from the Navajo Nation, and the water that is on the Navajo Nation is contaminated. And since there is a lack of clean water, like I mentioned before, most Navajo people have to use unregulated water sources. A study is being done on the Navajo land looking at the effects of the uranium poison. And this is called the Navajo Birth Cohort Study. This study is looking into mothers, fathers, and their babies, and is directly looking at the blood, urine, and the McCoy. This study found that 17% of the participants have urine concentration than the United States' 95th percentile. This means that 3 out of participants have a higher level of uranium in their urine compared to 1 out of other Americans. On the Navajo land, the Indian Health Service estimates that about 7.3% of all deaths in their service area cancer from the effects of the uranium contaminants. And this water issue is a very large issue that needs to be solved to save the lives of the Navajo people. And given the history between the Navajo Nation and the United States government, this led us to put our research into a solution to help the Navajo people.
We are now going to talk about a few existing solutions. The Navajo Nation has had a water problem since the United States started mining on their land. In the past decade, they have started to receive help from a nonprofit organization called Dig Deep. The Dig Deep organization started out being a global organization that would bring water to people in need. In 2014, the program decided to narrow down the amount of places there are specifically on the water problems in the United States. In 2014, the Dig Deep program started off working only in the New Mexico part of the Navajo Nation, and in the following years moved into Arizona and Utah. The Dig Deep program in the Navajo Nation has 12,000-gallon water tanks stationed around the 3 states. People from the surrounding areas are then able to travel to these tanks to receive water. The tanks are refilled by Dig Deep employees. When the tanks become low, in the past several months, the Dig Deep organization has had to stop refilling the tanks of water due to COVID-19. This has caused major problems for people in the Navajo Nation. People from the community have had to take matters into their own hands and start finding other ways to receive water. Some people in the Navajo Nation have had to quit their jobs and begin delivering water to people in the community who are unable to travel due to the distance to get water or do not want to risk traveling out of fear of COVID-19. We hope to have the Dig Deep program resume helping the Navajo Nation while our applied innovation is in the process of being installed to allow a more immediate solution for the people of the Navajo Nation.
Another pre-existing solution is the Navajo-Utah Settlement Trust Fund. This was initially proposed in 2016, but wasn't officially passed until just last year. This agreement essentially guarantees the Navajo more access to clean water sources in the state of Utah, and it also means that the Utah government must pay almost $200 million over the course of 3 years to the trust fund account. This will pay for building pipelines and otherwise transporting the clean water. Unfortunately, this solution only impacts a small region of the Navajo Nation, and for our solution, we wanted to come up with something that would have the potential to be more widespread and help a greater number of people. It's also difficult to see what level of impact this previous solution has had so far, since the settlement was only resolved quite recently.
The last solution we looked at was solar photovoltaic desalination using distillation. This was studied on the Navajo Nation in 2014 by the University of Arizona. It can be used with many different water contaminants like iron, nitrates, and even arsenic. However, for the Navajo Nation, it will be focusing on the cleaning of the uranium from water. The way it works is inside of a solar still, which would be where the contaminated water is stored. You can have a roof made of glass in which it would work similar to a greenhouse, or you can use solar panels to heat the inside of the still. As that water that is inside heats, it begins to evaporate, causing the air inside of the still to become very humid. This humid air mixes with the colder air, or water, that sits beneath and allows the contaminants to be released and rise to the surface of that colder water. That can then be filtered from the water, and the cold water can be drained out, and that becomes the clean distilled drinking water. This process was extremely effective. The experimenters found about 5 parts per million dissolved solids in the filtration system. However, it was never implemented on the Navajo Nation, in which they stuck with the Developing Dig Deep program. And although the Navajo Nation helped fund the original experiment, it was extremely expensive, costing about $200 per square meter. That would be for the solar still, the pipes, and other expensive materials used in the distillation process. Years later, some new researchers took forth to find a way to make the process cheaper so it could be used more widely, especially in countries, developing countries where water access is particularly difficult. The new team was very successful. They shrunk the stills down to an extremely small version of the original size, and they used cheaper materials to collect the sunlight called nanomaterials. They were able to get the price down to about $1.60 per square meter. However, the solar stills were so small that they were not sustainable for average American living styles. For example, these smaller stills would be used for smaller tasks, whereas in American living, we would need them for drinking water, cooking, cleaning, showers, washing machines, etc. This would mean that each family would need multiple solar stills, driving up the cost. That brings us back to the original problem. And because of this, the Navajo Nation decided to stick with previously implemented solutions. However, those solutions never solved the initial problem. That is why our innovative solution will be a better option for the Navajo Nation to solve their water contamination crisis.
All right, going on into our applied innovation section. Our applied innovation will be using a clean tech continuous ionic filtration water treatment plant. An example will be shown on the right, and this is of a plant in Australia at the moment. So continuous ionic filtration is the process of using ionic transference to filter out water. So on the right, you will see an example of the column. So a water plant or continuous ionic filtration water plant will have multiple water tanks with these sort of solutions in it. So they have charged resin beads, which when introduced into the water, will attract and transfer ions with the uranium inside the water, creating a uranium sulfate. And then this suspended solid will then be filtered out. With multiple columns on the plant, multiple filtrations will be occurring continuously, meaning continuous ionic filtration plants are continuous. They happen repeatedly, and they are also more effective. Some requirements for this solution is going to be funding, which Lydia will explain a little bit further on. We'll be looking at grants as well as federal funding, as well as donations. One of the big issues will be the approval to build on Navajo Nation land. And if approved, land needs to be sold. Like I said before, Lydia will be discussing this a little bit further on. So one of the biggest problems right off the bat will be building the decontamination plant itself. This is a very large plant. It will take several years. We also would like to build several more holding tanks, as well as water pipelines and water tanks to complement the Dig Deep project that is currently on the Navajo Nation. Some design implementation would be possibly to shrink down the continuous ionic filtration system and move it into the homes, but this has its own bevy of requirements and like logistical considerations that would need to be taken into effect.
We intend to begin our project by immediately applying for grants and other government funding. This is a really expensive project, so we expect this to take possibly up to 2 full years in order to secure enough funding to begin breaking ground. This will also be an ongoing process throughout the project in order to put less stress on the budget and allow for upkeep and possibly later improvements. While we're securing funds, we will also be in partnership with Navajo leaders and clean tech to design the plants in a way that best fits the Navajo reservation's needs. Cleantech, as Dylan mentioned, is the company who designed the CIF plants in Australia and the Middle East and are displayed in this presentation, and they are considered the leaders in the field of water treatment. Once we have adequate funding, we intend to begin construction. Based on Cleantech's other plants, we expect this to take a maximum of 1 year, allowing us to begin the water treatment process in year 4. The primary obstacle to our solution, as Dylan mentioned, is funding. The CIF plant can cost upwards of $1.5 million, which does not include the cost of pipelines. This is why, as I mentioned before, we will constantly be applying for funding. It is also our group's belief that the vast majority of the funding should come from the federal government, since it was they who took advantage of the Navajo people and neglected to close or properly clean up after the mines in the first place. There is also the issue of potentially building on sacred ground. This is why we want this entire project to be in partnership with Navajo leaders. We want to make it clear that we want to help, but we don't want to sweep in and solve their problem. This should be a collaboration and not an imposition.
We also had to acknowledge the disposal of the uranium contaminants and any other contaminant that was removed from this water. Since the uranium is natural that's coming out of the mines and is less radioactive than the uranium that has been enriched for this use of nuclear fuel, we are looking at using the simple storage method. This method uses a dry steel cylinder that also has inert gas or water to keep the radioactive waste from escaping. This steel cylinder is then placed inside of another concrete cylinder that acts as a radiation shield to keep the radiation from reaching outside of the container. This cylinder does not require any special locations or transportation, so it can be built right next to our CIF plant. And this storage method also makes it very easy to remove the radioactive material so that it can be recycled. This recycled material can then be sold to the government, the military, or any other reputable agency that can reprocess the uranium and use it for different purposes. This can then bring money into the Navajo government. Our plan is to have the Navajo government be in charge of the selling of the material so that in return they can have the money that is made off of these sales.
As for positive potential outcomes, our project is very sustainable. Building a large CIF plant allows for water recycling, which is very important in the southwestern United States as they are currently in the middle of a drought. A large plant also allows us to recycle the treatment chemicals, the resin, and the waste products, as Olivia mentioned. Lastly, the use of solar energy makes the project more sustainable and reduces the overall cost in the long run, as we'll be able to produce our own energy. The water treatment will also reduce the need for Navajo people to frequent the unregulated and unsafe water sources, which will therefore reduce the health effects that come with consuming uranium. In short, although the project might take a while to implement, it will make a long-term change and it will revitalize the Navajo Nation and its people.
So overall, clean water is very important to the survival of our planet and everything that is in it. Without clean water, humans can suffer from a variety of health issues and in the most severe cases, death. With our applied innovations, the continuous ionic filtration system, the members of the Navajo no longer have to be worried about using these unregulated water sources and use our clean water where there is no contaminant levels. With lower contaminant levels, the high death and cancer rates would decrease, as well as the level of contaminants that are found in the adult Navajo people as well as in the newborn babies. Not just on the Navajo land, but just humans all over the world. We shouldn't have to worry about using clean water. And with our solution, more specifically, the people on the Navajo Nation won't have to worry about this clean water. And in the future, we hope that Cleantech can potentially build more plants throughout the world, even in Flint, Michigan, potentially. And then this solution can then help other people around the world and not just in the United States. So we are now going to be taking any questions.
All right, so if you have a question, you can put that into the chat, or you can indicate that you would like to ask a question. But let's first give a quick round of applause. All right, looks like we have a question from Mark Keynes. Is the level of uranium contamination higher in abandoned mines than working mines? Was uranium contamination a problem when the mines were active?
So with it being in World War II, there wasn't a ton of like resources that told us how the levels of uranium contamination was while the mines were active. Groups of Navajo women who lost either family members or more specifically their husbands came together after the mines were shut down because their husbands and family members died of cancer and uranium poisoning, and they were the ones that actually brought attention to the uranium contamination. So right now, all of the research that we had was on the abandoned mines, since that's what's been looked at with conversations between the Navajo government and the United States government. And uranium contamination was still a problem while the mines were active. They just didn't know it at the time because the government didn't tell the Navajo people who were living by the mines or working in the mines that radioactive contamination was going to be a problem. That was just found out after women came together and did more research and brought attention to the issue.
All right, Sierra has a question. Would you be able to explain more about what the charged resin beads do?
Sure. So the charged resin beads are actually within a sort of chemical solution. And this is a little bit of a lengthy explanation. But so in the column, it's the regular groundwater that is spun in any direction. And then the chemical solution along with the charged resin beads are put into the water countercurrently. So they're going against the water when they're introduced. So then the charged ions within the resin beads, charged ions would then sort of swap ions within the uranium metals. This combines and creates a new thing called uranium sulfate. And then this is the solution that is then removed from the water itself.
All right, and then Michelle Whitler has a question. Has this solution been considered for the Navajo Nation in the past? If not, do you know why? If it has been considered, why was it not pursued?
Specifically, the continuous ionic filtration is relatively new. Ionic transference, which it's based on, has been around for probably 50 or 60 years. But the sort of implementation of the continuous ionic filtration is in multiple countries, but not the United States. It is just hasn't been implemented yet.
I have a question for you too. So in making this for the Navajo Nation, one of the problems you've addressed as the previous solutions is that it's such a big area and sort of different locations. How many of these do you think you would need to build, or how many are you planning to build?
Just one plant, because one CIF plant, or continuous ionic filtration, if they're at like max flow, can clean over 200 tons of wastewater a day. So we probably plan around just one plant, although we want to implement multiple water tanks and holding tanks throughout the Navajo Nation, because like you said, it is a very large area. It spans multiple countries or states, sorry. So one plant with 200 tons of water with multiple holding plants, holding tanks around the Navajo Nation would be able to cover the large area.
A couple more questions in the chat here. So based on the plant in Australia, how much water, oh, you just answered that. How much water would be produced and how many people would be helped? So could you give maybe the estimate of the people?
We calculated that this amount of water would help about 20,000 to 30,000 homes per day.
Can you compare that to the Navajo Nation? Like how many homes there are in the Navajo Nation or people?
There are close to 40,000 homes in the Navajo Nation, so it doesn't help everybody. Maybe not people in very remote rural areas, but it does help the vast majority, unlike the current solutions that are already in place.
And our hope is that with the implementation of multiple different water tanks sporadically spread throughout, one family that, you know, before would have to travel a large distance would not have to travel as far.
All right, I think we have one last question. So Travis is wondering, do you think that your solution makes sense to replicate elsewhere in the world, or does it mostly make sense in a setting like the American Southwest?
Like I said before, it's actually implemented in several different countries. America has not just implemented it yet. It can be implemented pretty much wherever you want, because the process is just cleaning out the water. We just felt that there is a need in the Southwest, as there is the American Southwest, as there is the drought issues, a lot of uranium contamination. So the water they do have, they have access to it, but if they do drink it, there's a bevy of medical concerns if they do.
And with clean tech, one mine that we mentioned in our presentation was in Australia, and that's focused on going over a lot of different contaminants. There's also one in Africa that is focused on cobalt mines and removing cobalt from the water. So it, like Dylan said, it can be used a lot to take out many different contaminants, and depending on where it would be located in the world and what contaminants are affecting certain people, it can be tailored to removing certain contaminants.
All right, that is all the time that we have. Let's give this group another round of applause. And thank you for joining us today.